Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for supporting very young children impacted by chronic stress and trauma. I'm so glad that you could be here with us. I do want to let you know that closed captioning is available if needed. Also, I just want to take the time to thank Vibrant Emotional Health for inviting me to be a part of this training today. Whether you work directly with adults or you work with children, I think the information we talk about today, you'll find is critically important if we really want to help those dealing with either chronic stress or with trauma, which is being experienced by those affected by hurricanes, like Hurricane Ian, or tornadoes, or earthquakes, or fire, or other traumatic disasters that are going on across communities all the time. If you don't know about Vibrant Emotional Health, I think it's something that you can look more on their website and learn a little bit more about them. I have been volunteering with the Vibrant Crisis Emotional Care Team and have found it such a rewarding experience. And so there is some information available here on this slide, this next slide, about how to connect with Vibrant if you are wanting to learn more about either getting support from their team or about volunteering with their crisis emotional care team. So we don't have to worry about the babies, do we? Right? I mean, they're little. They're not going to remember anything, right? They won't remember a single thing, especially if they're infants, right? Well, what we're going to do today is talk more about why we really do need to talk and remember and think about and take action on behalf of our little tender-aged ones, because they are impacted by what's happening around them, even though they might not be able to tell you with their words. I think that we're going to talk a lot about terms like co-regulation and help you to understand the interplay between the young child and the grown-up that's caring for that child. When we talk about co-regulation, I just want to read you a quick definition by definitions.net. That co-regulation is a term used in psychology defined as continuous unfolding of individual action that is susceptible to being continuously modified by the continuously changing actions of the partner. That's a lot of continuously's. The idea is things are happening around us all the time. And we are impacted, whether we're a young child impacted by their caregiver, or we're a grown-up impacted by the others around us. That co-regulation is a very important concept in our work with people who are dealing with trauma. And so for us, we really want to make sure we pay attention to it. There already have been studies done, especially with our military population. And believe it or not, having a child who is displaying problematic behaviors like severe tantrums, difficulty regulating their emotions, and having a parent with post-traumatic stress disorder, they're so related that one can predict the other. So we know that when one part of that dyad is interrupted by stress or difficulty regulating their emotions, it impacts the other one. And that's what co-regulation is all about. So you're going to hear a lot about that today as we focus on how do we take care of supporting these little ones. One of the things that I want you to know is I'm going to probably frequently use the term parents. I'm going to use the term caregiver. I'm going to use other terms, but I'm using this in the broadest sense of the word. And in fact, caregiver may be the shelter youth care worker who's working with that young child. It may be a foster parent. It may be a kinship care provider like a sister or an aunt. So when I use the term caregiver or I use the term parent, please think of it in its broadest context. We're going to be talking a lot today about, again, what does a child need to grow up and develop across all domains? We're talking about cognitively, physically, socially, emotionally, communication, across all domains. What do they need? And then also we're going to review some basic brain development information on how trauma can actually disrupt brain development in a young child. We'll be unpacking strategies for addressing the needs of a young child and ideas for promoting the emotional regulation and mental wellness for our little ones. And we're going to, again, very much stress the importance of thinking about the dyad, the caregiver, and the child as we think about supporting these little ones. So let's think for a minute. Let's pause and consider what an experience might be like from the perspective of a young child. So imagine with me for a minute, a little young Anya. Anya is 14 months old. And here are Anya's words as we think about what she's experiencing. Mama and Papa are both home. I think now that we're home, next comes food. Ooh, we're gonna eat. But wait, everything is different. Mommy and Papa aren't holding me and smiling at me. I can't seem to get their attention. I try all the usual things, but they keep talking and I'm hungry and I feel wet and I start to cry loudly. Hey, someone, come here, come take care of me. Papa comes and he picks me up, but he doesn't feel right. His body is so tense and I keep crying and I start to struggle. I want mommy, she'll know how to comfort me, but Papa almost like he speaks to me really sharply and I feel like I'm being thrown to mama and I don't know why. And he just seems so mad. But here's mama. Here, she kisses me on the head and she tells me that she loves me. But something isn't right there either. Mommy's voice is like cracking and she sounds, oh, look, she's crying. She changes me and she sits me down in my chair and she gives me some cereal, but I don't want to eat. I arch my back and I struggle. I don't want to stay in this chair. I don't feel safe. I'm not having it. Something isn't right and I don't want to do this. Somebody, please, somebody take care of me. Why aren't they the same? Why don't they laugh with me like they usually do? When we think about our babies and our tender age children, they need to have a trusted caregiver present to help them to feel safe. And what happens when that trusted caregiver isn't able to reassure that child, when they can't respond to that child? Well, we know that when a child is dysregulated, when a child doesn't feel safe, when a child feels like something's wrong, we see some behaviors that some people call problem or challenging behaviors. And they're things like frequent crying for what seems like no reason, because we don't know why they're crying, right? It's not that there isn't a reason, it's that we don't know what the reason is. We see behaviors like fear of leaving the caregiver, or things like being afraid of the dark, things that like are really like bothersome, like things that they're trying to get your attention, but not necessarily in the most positive way, like throwing things, right? Or breaking a toy. Or we see changes in their eating and sleeping patterns. They're more irritable, they're fussier. They might be aggressive with hitting or kicking or biting. The biggest thing we also see is some children withdraw. They get quieter, they hide. And these kids, sometimes we don't notice that they are in distress, but they're so quiet, we're not paying attention to them. And of course, a lot of times these kids are very difficult to calm. I want to know that these concerning behaviors, one of the things for us to kind of think about is the fact that these concerning behaviors are present, but they are also a part of normal development. We're going to see these regularly throughout their development. It's more when it's consistent and prolonged and not resolved that we have concerns. And if we think about little Anya, she's going to experience that, what we call misattunement with their parent on a regular basis. But if little Anya gets here, what you see on the slide, this consistency, this emotional attunement and sensitivity to what she might be experiencing, and a parent who can respond according to what they're seeing, a parent who's aware of that co-regulation and is able to calm themselves to be that calm presence for their child. And that on balance, rather than that misattunement, like we talked about earlier with Anya, instead they get a parent who is able to attune to them. Then those incidents when parents aren't getting along, or when a caregiver can't pay attention the way a child wants, when a child is crying or maybe having some emotional concerning behaviors, the reality of that is those are not going to long-term affect that child. What we are concerned about is when the child is experiencing a period where they don't have a parent who can respond to them, can pay attention to them, because that parent has some emotional needs of their own. Perhaps they're experiencing some trauma or some dysregulation of their own. We want to pay attention to how the caregiver is, because if a caregiver is not able to provide these things that a young child needs on an ongoing basis, on a regular basis, then that's when we see problems with children that can have lasting impacts. Let's spend a little bit of time thinking about that. The reality is Donald Winnicott, who's a very famous child psychiatrist, said, "There's no such thing as a baby." What? What do you mean? Of course there's babies, right? But there's a baby and someone. So when we think about that, when we think about trying to support a little tender age child, we're thinking about supporting both the baby and their caregiver. We have to think about them together, not one apart from the other. And by caregiver, again, the broadest sense of that is who is providing care for that child. That person has to be able to give that child the things we saw in the earlier slide, the consistency, the responsiveness, the co-regulation that's so important for them to feel safe. Why is that? Well, let's talk a little bit about the developing brain. The brain is rather interesting because it grows from the bottom to the top, and it grows from the back to the front of the brain. That's how our brain's development. The first thing that happens, of course, the brainstem that helps us to learn how to breathe. Hello, you got to have that before you can have anything. For our heart to pump, all right? All of those things are in the brainstem. Then our emotional part of our brain grows, and Dr. Dan Siegel, who's an amazing psychiatrist, I recommend his book, The Developing Mind. He uses the hand as a model for the brain, and he talks about the thumb. If you put it right over your hand, you might think of that as limbic system, or the emotional center of the brain. This amygdala area of the brain is kind of is where the fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain is. It's the one that reacts to danger and says, "Ooh, we need to pay attention here." That's the emotional center of the brain. That grows first, right? Because we have to know how to keep safe and survive. And then over time, the rest of the brain also grows, including the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking part of our brain, okay? The part that says, you know what? That dog is on a leash, so that dog is not dangerous to me. I'm safe. I don't have to worry about that dog, because you can think about it, right? So that prefrontal cortex develops last. And that's very important as we talk about the developing brain. Something else to kind of think about is the way our neurons develop. They explode when we're first born. And they form all of these connections. In fact, after a baby's born, scientists say these connections are forming at the rate of 1 million new connections a second in a baby's brain. That is amazing. So there's all of these connections. And then over time, what baby does is that they either use it or they don't. And if they don't use it, they kind of drop away, or the word that scientists use is it's pruning, that those parts, those neuronal connections that aren't needed go away. and those that are used stay, right? So you can kind of think about it as you might have the whole map of New York City in your head, which would be phenomenal if you did. But then you have certain routes you take to work all the time. Those are your routes, right? You know how to do that. You memorize that, and that gets wired into your brain. That's how you go to work. You almost automatically turn that way because you're so used to going that way. That's what happens to the brain. We keep those things that we know, and those things that we don't know fall away. We don't remember them. So some scientists say you use it or you lose it. But think about this. Think about those kids who don't have exposure to things, so they never get the neuronal connection to begin with. Or think about those kids who are being exposed to traumatic events or chronic stressful events, what that means of what's getting hardwired into their brain, right? We want to think about both of those things when we think about young children. So when we another part of the brain that's really important for us to consider is the autonomic nervous system. And I talk about this, you go, why are we talking about all this brain stuff, Julia? And part of the reason is because if we understand this stuff, we better understand how to support those young kiddos. The autonomic nervous system is something that really makes a difference for our fight or flight response when we're under tremendous stress, what our body does. We are born with a brain that's not fully developed. Think about it. Your heart's beating the way it's supposed to. It's fully developed. Your lungs are fully developed. It's breathing, right? But your brain is not fully developed. It takes time to develop the different parts and grow. So when they're very little, babies are susceptible to having things impact that development. And one of the things that's really important is the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is there when their child is born. Hello, that's how they let you know that they need help. They, if they're hungry, they can cry so you can pay attention, right? But what they're not born with is their parasympathetic nervous system. That develops over time. So the best way for me to describe it is pretend you're driving in a car. And all of a sudden you see a ball roll out in front of you, and a little kid starts to dash out in front of following that ball. And what do? You immediately slam on your brakes, stop the car, and you probably notice that your heart is beating really fast. You might have stopped breathing for a while. That's your sympathetic nervous system in action. It's saying, right now, do something to keep people safe. That's your sympathetic nervous system, okay? Okay, now you go, okay, the little girl's fine. The ball is on the other side. There's a grown-up there that's going to get the child. Everything's under control. I'm okay now. Whew, I can calm down now. I can breathe. I can let my body go back to its normal state. That's the parasympathetic nervous system. And guess who doesn't have one on board when they're born? Is newborns. So newborns have to borrow the parasympathetic nervous system of their caregivers. If their caregivers are distressed too, they don't have a way to calm. Now they might cry themselves to sleep, but their brain is staying activated with all of those stress hormones like cortisol going wild in their brain, and they're not coming down to a I'm safe, I'm good, all is well state. And that makes a difference. Why does it make a difference? Let's take a look. Before I get to a picture of the brain that it's really fascinating, I want to talk about memory. Again, back to the idea of babies won't remember. Babies remember what happened to them in their bodies, in their core. When we think about how babies remember, we might think about the idea of implicit versus explicit memory. Now, implicit memory is something that we don't really know how we know it, but we know it. It's kind of there, but we don't know why. Now, explicit memory is what most of us think of when we talk about memories of, oh, babies won't remember. That is, they can recite back to you like a chronology, like a newspaper article of what happened. That's an explicit memory. An implicit memory is just these feelings that come up. that's associated with something. And someone might not even understand how it's associated, but those are there. The implicit memories are being hardwired into our children from birth. And in fact, prenatally, we know even prenatally, children can have be exposed to anxiety even prenatally. So we want to pay attention to the idea of what is the child being exposed to when they're little. You know, trauma is the very simplistic definition is experience that exceed our ability to cope. So when you think about this and you think about a young child, since they are tied to that caregiver, their ability to cope is tied to whether they feel like that grown-up, that caregiver, can respond to them and help them feel safe and secure. And if they don't feel safe and secure, it can impact their brain. When young children are in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, it's not just a matter of, like for us, like, okay, we stop and our heart beats fast for a little while, then it slows down. Believe it or not, it's impacting all over your body. Your digestive system slows down or stops. Your salivation glands stop working the way they're supposed to. Your perspiration changes. Your heartbeat changes. All of this is a result of that fight, flight, or freeze response. And so for a young child, we know that fight, flight, or freeze comes when they don't feel safe, and safety comes from their grown-ups helping them to feel safe. All of that is tied together. So when we talk about child development, what we're talking about is how toxic stress or events occurring repeatedly over time can invoke this stress reaction. And we know that that toxic stress, perhaps that toxic stress is around something like a hurricane, where everyone is kind of affected and worried. If a grown-up isn't able to help that child feel safe, then their brain is filled with cortisol and other stress hormones that can impact the child over a period of time. The cool thing is a child who has a caregiver who's able to pay attention to them and give those things we talked about, those attuned, positive responses, it can change the impact of that toxic stress. When we think about toxic stress right now, again, babies can't control how they respond. They have that fire it up, right? Response. They don't have that ability to calm themselves down. They don't have the ability to say, oh, I see everything's okay now. The rain has stopped. They don't have that. They stay activated unless they have a way of calming through co-regulation with a grown-up or with another trusted caregiver. So I think that when you think about this, many of you work with families that are involved with community traumas like hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes or fires, but also many of you work with families who have strong emotional needs. Perhaps a parent is dealing with a mental health disorder, or there is substance abuse in the family. One of the things that we know is these definitely have long-term impacts on the children. And if you haven't read the literature on the adverse childhood experiences studies done by Dr. Anda and Dr. Folletti, I really highly recommend you do so. And you can find a lot of information on this on the CDC website. But understanding how these early adverse experiences impact children is really critical. Now, we know that there's more adverse experiences than just what you see on the slide, abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. There's a lot more, but these have been studied a lot, and it shows a correlation between the number of these adverse experiences and how it impacts someone's health as an adult. And by health, we're talking about mental health, physical health, like heart disease, gastrointestinal diseases, depression and mental health disorders, and substance abuse. So the more adverse experiences a child experiences in their life as a young child, the more likely they're going to have physical and mental health issues as a grown-up. There's quite clear literature that ties these together. The more exposure, the greater the chance there's going to be a physical outcome. You think about it, again, what I talked about brain development, what happens in that autonomic response system, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. What happens? The cortisol shuts down your digestive system. It makes your heart beat faster. It makes your salivation glands and your perspiration glands go crazy. All of that are tied to your physical well-being. And if that happens enough, it changes the dynamic in those organs. So you can see how that could then later on in life play a role in health issues. When we know that we are dealing with ACEs, it's something that we want to make sure we're addressing immediately. We also want to make sure that we're addressing community traumas and making sure that we help families feel safe so they can help their child feel safe. And that's what a lot of you do. When a family feels mental health disorder, they feel dysregulated, they feel out of their bodies, they feel depressed, they feel suicidal, any of that can then also play a role on how that child is feeling, whether that child can feel safe. So we want to pay attention to it, because what happens is we know children who are constantly exposed to those stress hormones, it changes the architecture of the brain. So take a look at this slide here. And this is a PET scan of a brain. And you look at it and it's just almost striking what you're seeing, that a child who's healthy and has had a responsive caregiver, that secure attached relationship that we know that is so vitally important for good development, we see that the child has this ability to use their prefrontal cortex as well as their amygdala. Everything is kind of activated and growing. You can see how everything is working in that brain. When you look at the brain that says neglected child, you can see that the prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped. There's not much action there. And the amygdala, or the emotional center of the brain, is quite active. What we know, this is from studies that were done in the Eastern European orphanages, that they thought they were doing the children a favor by not attaching to the child. So they had very little social connection with the child. They would basically take care of all of their physical needs, but they would not bond with the child. They would not say, "Good morning, sweetie, how are you?" They would try to be as robot-like as possible, because they didn't want the child to attach to them, because if they got adopted, they wanted them to attach to the adoptive parents. That was their reasoning. You can see where that comes from. But unfortunately, what it did was raise children that had severe deficits in their brain development caused by lack of social emotional development, because there were no relationship. The children did not feel emotionally safe. They did not have that caregiver who could have that co-regulated, attuned, responsive relationship with their child. That's, they have clearly learned from that. The science has been quite clear. And so we know that throughout the world, they're changing how they do things. They don't do it that way anymore. They know better. But we know that every day there's kids like this that are dealing with parents who aren't able to attend their needs because they have so many traumas themselves that they're trying to deal with, or mental health issues they're trying to deal with, or just safety issues themselves of trying to make sure that the whole family is safe. You think about a family who's living in a war zone, what that is like for that family. So what we know is we want to prevent as much as we possibly can the impact of this toxic stress, and instead move a child towards having a secure, attached relationship that helps their brain to grow the way we want it to. The exciting news is our brains are very plastic. Neuroplasticity means that our brains can make these changes. And in fact, we know changes can happen. Even adults can make changes that can change the way they see the world and the way they operate. But as you can see from the chart here, that it's much easier to make those changes in the direction we want them to, the younger the child is. If we wait until the child is older, even 20, it becomes very difficult. And if we wait until they're 40, 50, it's even harder. So the earlier we start, the easier it is. And below 5 is really, to me, critically important, because we don't know, back to the slide about pruning, we don't know how much is lost in brain development if we don't intervene as soon as possible to make sure these children are feeling as safe as we possibly can. And we do this through secure attachments. Secure attachments are having a parent who can provide a secure base for a child, having a parent who can help that child feel like they're adored. That's so important for children. So stress that would be toxic becomes tolerable with a secure attached relationship. And so I think that when we think about it, even something as devastating as losing a parent in the early years, that is such a trauma for a young child. But having another caregiver who can let the child know that they're loved unconditionally, that they are there to respond to them, that when they cry, that they're there to dry their tears, that they're there to help them have boundaries so they know what happens next. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the most important aspects of that secure base next. Again, we talked about co-regulation and regulation earlier, but one of the things important is kind of, I like to think about it as babies developing ability to regulate their own emotions. Since they don't have that parasympathetic nervous system when they're first born, how do we help them develop a strong and really good parasympathetic nervous system? Borrowing from their parents, we go from a baby who has to be picked up when they're crying and has to be comforted, right? You pick the baby up and you hold them and you let them know that someone is there. And we can tell you right now, the first year of life, you cannot spoil an infant. You want them to know that someone's going to be there every time they cry. That's really important. And then you help children learn how to do some self-soothing. So one of the tricks a lot of the people who teach parents how to help their child sleep is don't respond right away when the baby starts to cry, when they're wake up in the middle of the night or when they're supposed to be sleeping through the night. Give it a minute and see if the cry changes, because it might first be kind of a and then baby figures out how to soothe themselves. Maybe they start to suck on their thumb. Maybe they find that they can pull into a tighter position and that gives them comfort. But you give them a second to learn how to comfort themselves because they're learning these self-soothing techniques. We say never take a baby's thumb away when they're an infant. You work on taking it away when they're older, because that's a self-soothing thing, right? So kids are learning this right from the beginning, right from infancy. And as a parent, we want to be attuned to what's happening with the child to help them regulate their emotions. We want to be attuned to know, for instance, a baby doesn't do as well sitting still and reading if they're tired. So we might want to save reading to when the child wakes up, not when they're getting ready for bedtime because they're too tired to sit and read a book. So noticing these things, being attuned to how their child is, being attuned to, oh, look, they're fussing. Is it that they're hungry or is it that they have a pain somewhere? I am paying attention to my child and figuring that out. And finally, remembering that a child cannot calm any more than their parent is, okay? So the bottom line is, if you want your child to calm down, if you're escalating and yelling at your child or at your teenager or at your colleague, they'll never achieve a higher level of calm than you are. So if you want them to be calm, you got to be calm. That's co-regulation in a nutshell, okay? So by remembering these, by remembering how important the connection is between the caregiver and the child it's going to help you do the next things about really trying to buffer young children from stress. And I think that a lot of this is obviously a simplification, but I think hopefully it helps you remember some just basic things to help young children feel more calm and get regulated when they're having a hard time. So the three things I want to talk about are knowledge that support is there, the ability to predict what comes next, and helping children to have a sense of control. So let's unpack all of those just a little bit. We want to, for example, we want to say out loud what we think a child might be feeling. This is so important. One of the things that I know many people who have kids, they think that it's important not to say anything that might remind the child of the trauma. Because, oh my gosh, if I say it, it's going to trigger them and I'm going to have to deal with all of their emotions. Remember, in the old days, there used to be teachers who encouraged parents to sneak out of the daycare center while their child wasn't looking, right? Because then maybe the child won't cry because they won't notice their parent leaving. The reality is that just makes the child feel more unsafe. It's like, hey, aren't you guys noticing that there's something wrong here? If you guys aren't noticing it, how am I supposed to trust you that you're going to be able to take care of me? So say out loud what you think the child is saying. I want to give you a really, I think, a great example of this. And that I was working at one of the refugee relocation centers, and a child and their sibling were living with their uncle and aunt. And it was a culture that took they kind of lived communally already. So the children already kind of knew the uncle and aunt as parent figures. They were very comfortable. They had lived their whole life with this uncle and aunt. But unfortunately, the children's biological parents, along with 3 siblings, were killed. Not killed, I changed that. They were missing. There was an explosion and a bombing, and they think that the parents perished in it, but they're not positive. The uncle thought that his son perished in the same explosion, but turned out that his son turned up to be fine. And 3 months after they had a hard time finding each other, and 3 months after the incident, the son was able to make contact. So this uncle had hope that the parents were perhaps not dead. Maybe they were in a hospital somewhere and he didn't know that. As refugees, they had fled the situation and they weren't able to search for these parents. So the children, they didn't know how to handle the children. And so what they did was they did nothing. They pretended everything was fine. And when the little girl would say, I want my mommy, they would say, oh, pretty soon mommy will come. We know anytime now mommy will come. They didn't want to say anything that would upset the little girl. Well, how the family got referred to me is the little girl was having tremendous stomach pain issues, all kinds of issues with her tummy. And so when I heard the story, and I said, well, uncle, how are you dealing with your own grief about losing your brother and your brother's family? And that's, 5 family members at once perishing, or not knowing where they are, if they perished or they didn't perish, this ambiguous loss of not knowing, but suspecting that something not good happened. How are you dealing with that? He goes, oh, for the children, I'm pretending everything's fine. Well, you can imagine what I suggested was, let's be honest. Let's say what we think happened. And so together we talked about what he might tell the children, and we decided he would tell the children that there was an explosion. We don't know what happened to your parents. It's possible your parents died, but we're not sure. And we're very sad. We're very sad when we think about the parents. And to let the children see that he is sad about this and that he acknowledges that something happened. Just that little bit of acknowledging and talking openly about this loss changed what happened for that little girl. Her stomach over the next month settled down. The uncle was able to grieve himself, and he said that he felt a lightness because while he cries more now, He felt a lightness because he could finally talk about it and he could finally acknowledge it. And together we made a little photo book of the family so the children could look at their family and see and talk about each of the family members, both the ones that were living and the ones that they didn't know what happened to them. And this just changed completely what happened for this family. So don't be afraid of saying out loud what you think the child might be feeling. Don't be afraid of shining a light on those scary things, because you follow that with, you know what, that was really sad, but we are here and we are together and we will do all we can to keep you safe. So the next part of that is reminding the children of that secure attachment, that they have someone there to keep them safe, that they will do everything they can to protect those children. Understand children that have been through any kind of chronic stress or trauma may have some of those acting out behaviors, problematic behaviors. I call them expressions of their trauma, right? When they are angry and they kick and they scream or they cry a lot. These kids might need more nurturing, more holding, more time in the lap, and just recognize that and accept it rather than trying to teach them to be, quote, big boys and girls. Instead, we want to say, you need a hug, let me give you a hug. You want to cry? Come, I'll hold you while you cry. You're whiny, I understand. You're not happy right now, and that's okay. There's so much that has been hard for you lately. Let me hold you. So don't be afraid to give that child more nurturing. And remember that you need to be the calm that you want your child to be. So the next thing that I really want to stress is the importance of helping your child to predict what comes next, or the child in question, what comes next. Routines are so important because kids learn to accept the routine as their safety. So I know that even though my tummy is feeling a little rumbly right now, that when the light comes up, someone's going to get up and they're going to feed me. That's a routine. I don't have to worry about the rumbly in my tummy as I get a little older and I'm now 3. I know that maybe I can wait for breakfast to happen because I know that's the routine of the household. We get up and we eat breakfast. So that helps me to feel safe. Whenever there's a disruption in the household for whatever reason, try to keep in place as many rituals as possible. For instance, the wake up routine or the bedtime routine. Even if the person who normally did that routine is no longer there, you want someone else to take that routine on. And perhaps the child will say, no, I don't want you to read. I want daddy. You go, daddy's not here. Well, I know you don't want me, you want daddy, but I'm going to sit over here by myself and I'm going to read this book out loud to you. And you start reading the book, even though the child perhaps isn't there, but that routine is still going to help that child settle and know that there's some normalcy in what's happening. So as many rituals as possible, you want to keep them in place for that child. Even so much as moving can be very traumatic for a child. I recommend having the child sleep in like, for instance, if the child is a 15, 16-month-old and you have them sleep in a crib, then they can sleep in a pack and play or kind of a thing when they're traveling. Have them sleep in that pack and play a couple weeks before you go on a trip, because it helps the child to feel settled because they know what this is, they know what to expect, and they know this is a sleeping place. My favorite is having a transitional object. So like a blanket that you always use to tuck them in to sleep with, maybe a stuffed animal. And so that becomes a ritual. So no matter where you are, if you can give them that blanket and that stuffed animal, that's part of the ritual. So if the child doesn't have any of those things, think about introducing them to help the child say, you know what, here, it's time for you to go to sleep. Here are some things to help you sleep, so that the child starts to develop a routine of knowing what's going to come next. We're the same way as grownups. You know, if our world is disrupted, we feel out of whack. We feel dysregulated. We like our routine as well. And while some of us might claim that we want to sleep till noon every day, the reality is we get into our routine of getting up for work and doing our routine. And on weekends, we can't go much past that because our body's used to that rhythm. And the same thing with young kids, their bodies get used to a rhythm, they come to expect it. So the more we can help them, the better. Now, some of you might say, well, I have kids. One of the things that is really important is making sure that children get their recommended sleep time. Some of you say, well, my kid sleeps when they want to, and they're always tired and grumpy, and I have a hard time getting them to sleep because they're going, and they cry when I try and make them sleep. And I really want to encourage you to have a routine of regular sleep rituals. And if a child refuses to nap, say, okay, you don't have to sleep, but I want you to stay in the sleep area and be quiet for that amount of time, for your allotted sleep time. Because a lot of kids will fall asleep as soon as they stop moving. So encourage them to have that quiet time if they don't sleep. If you go to the CDC website, there's a great article on how much sleep do I need, that talks about how much sleep each age needs, and you might be surprised at how much they need. And it also talks a little about sleep and sleep disorders to help with more information to support someone who's having trouble sleeping. The last thing in this predict what comes next is to remember that while children are not miniature adults, they have a lot of the same responses we do. And we wouldn't like it if someone all of a sudden picked us up and moved us and didn't explain what was going on. We'd probably kick and scream if someone tried to do that, right? The little kids are the same. We want to tell them what's going to happen before we do it. So even something as simple and mundane as a diaper change, we want to say, okay, I'm going to change your diaper. I'm going to pick you up now, to let them know what comes next. And if you practice that, especially if there's been a dysregulation in that child's life, letting them know what comes next, even in the moment like that, can help a child to feel more secure, like, okay, I know what's happening. I don't have to be surprised by what's happening to me. I know what's happening. So along with that is the next point for supporting a young child. And that's helping to support a young child to have a sense of control. A sense of control is really important. When we talk about a sense of control, I think for you, part of the reason why disasters like tornadoes and hurricanes are so difficult is the fact that we feel like we have no control over what's happening, that Mother Nature is coming down and we have no control. And so if you went to work and every day you went to work, your boss changed what you were going to do, that'd probably be pretty upsetting to you. If your spouse came home and you never knew what your spouse was going to do or wanted to do, that could be a little disconcerting too. There's comfort in knowing what happens and having a sense of control over what happens. For little kids, you have to think about control within limits. So we want kids to have options because it helps them to feel empowered and like they have some control over what's happening. But we can't give them too many limits or they fall apart. So think about taking a 4-year-old into a toy store and tell them that you're going to buy them a toy for a present. You probably are going to have a meltdown because there's too many choices and it just overwhelms them. It's like they want everything and they don't understand why they can't have everything. If I can have this, how come I can't have this? If you're going to buy me one, why not two? Or wait, you said I could have anything and now you won't give me this thing that costs too much money. You didn't say it was a limit on it, right? And the kid's going to melt down. I tell you right now, they're going to melt down. So what do? What we do is we help kids have choices within limits. And so we help them when they're really little, when they're 3 and under, it's just a choice between 2 things. It's like, and there's so many opportunities to give them choices. Like instead of saying, what do you want to wear today? You say, do you want to wear this shirt or this shirt? Much easier. Then they pick one of the two, okay? Or you say, do you want milk or water with breakfast? Giving them healthy choices that you're willing to accept, and not giving them unlimited. What do you want to drink? I want a soda. No, you can't have a soda. That's not okay. Well, that's what I want. And then you have a battle over that. Instead, you give them choices within limits, and those limits are limited to 2 if they're little, maybe 3 if they're a little bit older, and you also limit it to what you approve of. Claire Lerner has a Learner Child Development website and some advice on helping kids who are having difficulty regulating their emotions. It's a parenting advice column. And she has some really great advice, in my opinion. One of the things she has is this idea of when you need a child to do a certain action, is you help them, again, have choice in the matter. Really, do they have a choice? In essence, if it's time to go to bed, they need to go to bed, right? But you can still give them a choice. And the choice may be, listen, it's bedtime. We need to go to bed. We need to go up to our bedroom and get our pajamas on, okay? Do you want to go up and get your pajamas on? Or do you need me to help you get upstairs and get your pajamas on? So the choice isn't to do it or not do it. The choice is to do it independently or to have help from the parent or the caregiver. So think about that. Isn't that clever? It's still empowering the child. So if you do need to help them get up those stairs or go to the back bedroom or wherever it is that where their pajamas are kept, they still have the idea that they are in control. And if they are refusing to go and refusing to budge, no, I'm not doing it. So, well, I guess you're choosing to have me help you, because it's still their choice. And you emphasize that it's their choice. It's amazing how powerful this is as a technique for kids, whether they've experienced stress and trauma or not, helping them to understand that what happens to them, a lot of it is under their control, and giving them opportunities to think about how they can control their everyday activities is very important. So I'm going to pause for a second just to check to see if there's any questions about any of that so far. Okay, looks like no. One of the things that I know is when I have seen where parents think that children are doing things to manipulate them or to make them feel like they are controlling the parent. In fact, Claire Lerner's book is Why is My Child in Charge? Because we know that we don't want to have kids in control. Kids need to have the parent be in charge. The kid needs to have the parent create these boundaries for them. That's really important. It helps them to feel safe. So when we think about helping children have a sense of control, it includes realizing these boundaries are important. So if you tell a child no, it helps a child to feel safer if you stick with that no. That's important to remember. So keep your boundaries. And remember that when a child is having a hard time, they're not giving you a hard time because they're trying to torture you. They literally are having a hard time because their little brains are having difficulty kind of coping with the stress of the moment. So we want to pause and we want to help the child in the moment by, again, being attuned to what's happening. Take a look, ask, is a child out of sync with themselves because they're hungry, because they're tired, because their life has been disrupted recently, because of some other external reason? Is any of that going on? Or is it that the child just doesn't have the ability to understand what's happening right now and how that's impacting them? My husband deployed when my daughter was quite young. She was 18 months old, actually 18 months old when he deployed, and he was going to be gone for 7 months. She was one of those babies that slept so easily. You'd put her down to sleep, and we do the bath, and then we would do the read a book, and then I would sing her a song, and I'd rock her a little bit, and then I'd put her down to bed, and she would say, "Night, night, mommy," and she'd go to sleep. A parent's dream, right? Then my husband deployed. He was in the Marine Corps, and he left. And all of a sudden, my daughter could not have me out of her sight. I'd go, and she'd go, "Night, night, mommy," and I'd start to walk out of the room, and she went, "Wah!" and start crying. And I'm going, "Oh my goodness, what's going on? You slept fine. You know how to go to bed by yourself now. You don't need me to stay in here anymore. We're past that stage. What's going on?" But being the social worker that I am, I went, "Dad left. She's realized that dad has disappeared and hasn't come back. And now she's afraid that I'm going to disappear." And I went, whoa, I need to think about this from her perspective. Now, mind you, I'm sad too, and I'm upset too because my husband's gone. He's going to be gone for 7 months. But I had to regulate myself, breathe, get myself to be calm. Okay. And then I had to approach my daughter thinking about what was it like for her? All of a sudden, this person who was such a big part of her life disappeared. Did she understand what a deployment was? No. Okay. To her, somebody disappeared. And there's when you think about separation, and many of you work with families, perhaps the kids are dealing with some kind of separation or loss. That's really hard on a young child because they really don't necessarily understand what's happening. So one of the things that we try and do is help give the child the words for what they're experiencing. So in this case, I said, "Jackie, daddy had to go away for work, but mommy doesn't have to go away for work. I get to stay right here with you, and I'll be here in the middle of the night if you need me. I'll be here in the morning when you wake up. I'm going to be right here with you." And we had to do kind of a slow getting out of the room, coming back, a little bit longer out of the room, coming back, but repeating that story over and over again. And it took about 3 weeks for her to settle. And then she was right back to the way she was before. It was "Night, night, mommy," and she was fine. But that period of time was stressful. And one of the things that I want to remind you of is it's stressful for both parties, for the child and the parent. And that's a time when you have to think about, is there a dangerous cycle between the parent and the child that could raise the possibility of perhaps a child abuse incident? Because here I am thinking the child knows how to sleep, and here she is not able to sleep all of a sudden. Could I do something like spank her to tell her, knock it off, stop being a spoiled brat, right? Could I misinterpret what she's saying if she's falling apart in a store and having a tantrum in the store, and I think she's trying to embarrass me on purpose? Little kids don't do things on purpose that way. They don't have the capacity to think that way. So when we work with families, we need to help them understand that that child is not giving you a hard time. That child is having a hard time, and we need to see it, and we need to respond to that. That is of the most importance, and that helps us to help calm that brain. Again, take that cortisol level down, help give that parasympathetic nervous system a boost because it's still developing, and help the child find their calm. Now, some of you might ask, when does the parasympathetic nervous system fully develop? I can tell you the child's ability to pause and think about consequences starts to come on board around 3. But I know some 20-year-olds who still have a hard time with it. So in reality, we say through the 20s, that part of the brain is still developing. That's why 20-year-olds still have problems with impulse control, because they can't think through what their actions are going to, the result of their action always, because they're thinking about the fun. And so it's not fully on board until they become an adult. That's how long it takes for that parasympathetic nervous system to develop. So at 3, they're just starting to have it come on board where they can think about consequences. So we want to think about that as we're dealing with kids when they're having a tough time, because yeah, their brain is still developing and it's not done until they're a grown-up. So I tried to put together a few resources that I thought you would appreciate in your role. The first one that I have on this list is Shelter from the Storm, and that's from 0 to 3. It is a suite of resources that they developed in concert with Save the Children in response to community disasters. And there's one set that's for early education providers that really talks about first what the early education provider needs to know about children and stress and trauma. And then there's handouts, little books that you can give to a parent that talks about how they can, again, kind of support that child or the children in their classroom or their parent or their children in their home. So that's the early child development and parent handbooks. The other set were designed for shelter providers to think about when they're trying to support families in emergency shelters. And it actually has great information about how to help parents create safe spaces for children when their lives have been disrupted. So those are a couple resources that you might want to take a look at. One of the things that's included in that we're going to talk about more is how the provider needs to take care of themselves if they're going to take care of these families who are dealing with trauma. Another great resource, and I encourage you to take a look at, is from Piplo Productions, and it's Stories for Social Good. There's several stories here. This is written more for the preschooler or the young kindergarten, first grader, that talks a lot about emotions in different situations. There's one on salmon trinca stories where they experience different things like hurricanes or fires, and really talk about kind of how, from a young child's perspective, how that perhaps trauma or disaster, community disaster, may be impacting the family and helping them to find the calm. There's also a great book written by Chandra Ghosh Ippen and illustrated by her husband that talk about, first there's Once I Was Scared, that really just talks about being afraid and gives permission for little kids to have all of their feelings, 100%, that it's okay to be afraid. There's nothing wrong with it. And it's such a comforting book, especially for kids who are having a tough time dealing with what's happened, the things that have been out of their control and made them feel not safe. She also has a book called Mama's Waves or Daddy's Waves that talks about living with a parent who has a mental health disorder and how a child, that parent may be unpredictable. And it's an excellent book and I highly recommend it. And she has a new one out that talks about homelessness. So really check out Piplo Productions and all of the great materials that she's created. Many of her stories can be printed out from the internet for free. And of course, you could order them in a bound book form as well. So something to think about. There's another book that she has, Holden Pot, that while it's written for kids, it's really written for the parents. And it talks about co-regulation, how a young child needs to have that caretaker there, be there to help them calm. So it's a great book that helps the parent understand the important role that they take in helping their child feel calm. Sesame Street, as you probably imagine, has amazing materials developed for a variety of situations, including emergencies. And so I've included the link for the Sesame Street Handling Emergencies and recommend that strongly for families that are dealing with that and they have preschoolers or, again, kindergarten, first grade age children. So the last one I have on here is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. If you are working in the field of trauma, it's a must for you to go to this website and take a look at all of the resources they have available there. There are so many great resources there. One I pulled out for you is the Child Trauma Toolkit for Educators, but there is so much more there that you can take a look at and learn about best practices in supporting families that have experienced trauma or chronic stress of any kind. Another important resource that I don't have listed here is Vibrant. Vibrant has lots of resources available, and I encourage you to explore their website to see what you can find in the way of support for adults and children who are dealing with trauma. So quite a few resources available. I encourage you in the chat, if you know of other resources that you want to highlight for folks, please feel free to put them in the chat as well. We welcome that as well, and we can learn from each other. So I would love to see that in the chat if you want to take the time to type that out, if you could. So, what I want to leave you with today is really talking a little bit about how you are and how important that is. We don't do enough to take care of ourselves as providers of emergency support or trauma support. And as I mentioned in co-regulation, how you are really is just as important as what you do. That little saying by Yeary Paul, who is an amazing founder of 0 to 3 and early child educator, is something that we repeat a lot in the field of infant early child mental health, because we know that if we aren't okay, that's going to come out in our behavior, in our tone, in our body language, and the choices that we make to offer support to families. So in order to have the kind of patience, the kind of calm needed to be fully present for those who are dealing with trauma, we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. I like to think about how much we can give. And if we have nothing to give because we're drained, then the people we're working with are going to sense that. And if we're not taking care of ourselves and we're inviting families to take care of themselves, they're not going to believe us because they see what you're doing and they're going to use you as a model. So we want to make sure that we're doing all we can to support those who come to us for services. And that starts by making sure we're taking care of ourselves. So I'd like to start kind of first take a moment to have you all do a real quick mindfulness exercise with me. And then I'd like to help you think about how you can use these with the families that you support. So let's take a moment and just get comfortable in your chair. This topic is kind of a tough topic to talk about as we're talking about children who are stressed or dysregulated. Let's just take a moment and just get comfortable in your chair. And one of the things we always want to invite people to do is to sit tall, okay, so that there's nothing blocking their breath, to put both feet on their ground so they're firmly grounded. And then we want to invite them to relax their shoulders and to relax their head. If their head drops, that's okay. Not everyone feels safe closing their eyes. And so we never tell people to close their eyes. We invite them to choose, again, either to close their eyes or just to soften their gaze. So I invite you to do that now, to sit tall, firmly grounded, relax your shoulders, and soften your gaze or close your eyes, whatever feels most comfortable for you. And then take a deep breath with me. Inhale and exhale. Once again, inhale and exhale. And what I want to invite you to do is to think about a place that you go in your mind to find calm. For each of this, it's going to be different. For you, it might be a beach that you've been to before that's just beautiful, and the sand is warm. You can feel the sun on your face. Perhaps there's a cool breeze that you feel, and you can hear the gentle waves blowing, rolling up on the shore, and then washing back out again. Just kind of put yourself in that place as much as you can, thinking about what you can see, what you can hear, what you can feel, and what you can smell. Just take a moment to just be there. And when you're ready to leave the place that you went to, perhaps it was a meadow, perhaps it was the mountains, perhaps it was the woods, perhaps it was a cloud floating in the sky. When you're ready to leave, count backwards with me from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take a deep breath and exhale it out. How does that feel? Did that help calm wherever you are right now? This is a very simple technique that you can use with families as you begin working with them, inviting them to first find the calm and then begin talking about what their needs are. It can really change kind of the flavor of the whole conversation. Now, you might be thinking, well, what if they're dysregulated? Well, guess what? That's when they need it the most. And you can start with, whoa, there's so much you're sharing with me right now. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Let's take a minute to breathe together, can we? So follow me. We're going to inhale slowly and exhale. And do that with the family so that they can understand how to connect with their own sense of calm. And you can do this with kids too. I'll tell you something. One of the things that really works well is to help someone to connect with their physical body as well as their mind and their breathing, right? Usually with mindfulness, we really focus on our breathing and try and clear our mind. When our mind's cluttered with all kinds of things, especially with a little kid, it really becomes hard to kind of find that calm. So engaging our whole body makes a difference. A very easy exercise to do with kids as young as 3 is a starfish breathing exercise. So you have them hold out their hand. So have them lay it out like this, but for our purposes, I'm going to show it like this so you can see it. So this is my starfish. Do you like my starfish? My starfish has 5 legs. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to run our finger up and down our starfish. Okay. And what we do is when we go up, we're going to breathe in. And when we go down, we're going to breathe out. Okay. All of you can join me. Breathe in and out. In and out. In, out, in, out, in, and out. Wow. How does that feel? Introducing this to young children is a great thing to do because they can take it anywhere with them and help them to feel again calm and find that sense of connection with themselves and with the earth. So encouraging families to have this ability to be calm and to find a little bit of quiet can make a big difference. If you run a shelter, or if you run or have a foster home, or if you work with families in their houses, I also encourage you to help families or to help create a quiet space within your home, especially if there's been a lot of trauma in that household, and that you go to that place to help find your calm. And even when kids are really little, rather than having timeouts or punishments when they are, quote, being bad, we say, I think we need to calm and think about what we're doing. Let's go to our quiet center and find some calm. And you can do things like this breathing exercise. You can do things like hug big stuffed animals together. And you can do things like sing songs that are calming, listen to music that's calming. These are all things that you can do to help children in the moment of dysregulation. We never try to teach a grown-up or a child what to do when they're dysregulated. We always have to make sure that they're in a calm place before we give them any important information, because when they're dysregulated, they're not going to hear it. So helping them find that calm is so important. So now what I'd like to do is take a little bit of time to see if you have any questions, and see if we might spend a little bit of time talking about what you might have questions about. So I invite you to ask any questions and to let me know, and we can see if we can't answer them together. And if I don't know, perhaps someone in our audience might know. So please feel free to ask your questions. So anybody thinking of any questions? I like that many of you like the starfish exercise and the mindfulness. Yeah. Oh, we have someone who used the starfish exercise just last night to help them get regulated after a tantrum. It's such a powerful thing that we can do. It's so simple. So I love that that worked for you. So anyone have no questions? So I am going to also just tell a couple more stories. This is a story of how the power of a parent's being able to regulate their emotions in the time of chaos and what a difference it makes for the kids. Now, this was during Hurricane Katrina, and a friend, Dr. Amy Dickinson, shared this story with me. And she said I could share it. But think about this. We have a huge deluge of water coming up, right? And so here's this mom and her two young daughters. They were 3 and 5. And their house got flooded with the water when the levees broke. And so a gush of water's everywhere. They tried to stay in their house, but they couldn't. The water rose so high, and mom just felt like they were in danger. So she put her children, both of them, on a door that was floating by. She just grabbed the door, put the kids on the door, and she just knew she had to go just downriver a little bit and over to the other side, and she could walk to safety. But where she was afraid that her kids were gonna drown because the water kept rising. So she put her kids on this door, and she got in the water, and she's holding onto the door and trying to kick and use the current to help her as she guided this door across, down the way a little bit and across. Think about how scary that would be, because if she got swept away, her kids would not have anyone. if her kids got knocked off, what would happen there? And her kids, she was afraid her kids were going to be scarred for life with how scary this was. And so this mom had the cool to say, guess what? We're going to pretend we're Dora the Explorer and we're going on an adventure. First, we're going to get on this raft and we're going to go down this river. Isn't that exciting? And they started singing songs that the girls were familiar with from Dora the Explorer as the mom kicked her way and managed to avoid debris that was in the river with her. And she was able to get across, and there was a gentleman that was there that saw her and helped pull the kids and her on shore. They were safe. They took the family over to one of the ships. They're out in the harbor where they had psychological first aid available to the families. And Dr. Dickinson was the one that heard this story. And the kids were having a good time. They're laughing. She did an assessment of them. They showed no signs of trauma. They were perfect. They continued to act out Dora the Explorer. They just thought that was the best. They wanted to know when they could do it again. Okay. Now, Mama was another story. She needed a lot of support because it was very traumatic for her, but she was able to keep her cool. She was able to be that secure base for her kids so that her kids were not impacted by that trauma. Is that not the coolest story? So that's what we're inviting our families to do in times of distress, is to find their calm so they can be the calm presence for their kids, to remember those key things that our kids need to feel safe and secure so that there won't be long-lasting either implicit memories or brain issues, social emotional development issues for these kids as they grow. So thank you very much. I don't think we've gotten any questions. So I think I'm going to ask if we should keep on talking or if I should end a little early. The idea of working with kids who've been traumatized, I think is something that I have to take my hat off to you. I don't know if you hear it often enough, how amazing you are to work with families who've experienced stress and trauma, but it's something that I want to just take a moment to say how much I appreciate the work that you do. It is not easy, what you do every day. Sometimes you bear the brunt of someone's fear from not feeling secure themselves. And so they take it out on you. And if you, again, can keep your calm and be the calm presence for those kids and realize what that behavior is saying about the family, that they don't feel safe. And you can help them find a little bit of safety through your calm expression of information that they need, from your compassion for what they're experiencing. You can really truly make a difference for these families. And sometimes just being that calm presence can make a huge difference for our families. So I thank you for what you do. I thank you for taking time to join us today and being a part of this webinar. And I look forward to perhaps you joining future webinars with Vibrant in the future. I do want to stress one more time what a great experience it was for me to volunteer with Vibrant. And I encourage you that if you have a little bit of time that you can give, to reach out and contact Vibrant to see what you can do to support the great work that they do throughout the country for families who are in distress. So thank you very much.